reading a little children's story in Yiddish when we were studying Yiddish. It was a cute little story, but it's very meaningful. And by the way, children's stories should be meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's only there to teach language. But as long as you're teaching, teach something meaningful. Don't make silly stories. You know, see Jack run. I mean, say something meaningful.
Right, exactly.
So the story goes like this. There was a boy named Benny whose mother gave him some money when he went on a hike. In case he gets hungry, he can buy himself something to eat on the way. So he was hiking and traveling, and he got hungry, and he went into the bakery, and he bought himself a roll. He ate the roll, and he continued on his way, and he found that he was really still hungry. So he stopped at a second store and bought a second roll. He ate the second roll, continued on his way, and before long, he found that he was still hungry. So he bought a third roll. And again, he finds himself still hungry. So the next store he went into, he bought a bagel. And after eating the bagel, he wasn't hungry anymore. And Benny thought to himself, oh, what a waste. I should have bought the bagel first, and then I wouldn't have to buy the 3 rolls.
Mm-hmm.
And then the book asked the reader, was Benny foolish or smart? Was his thought a correct one or a silly one? And of course, the answer is it's a silly one, because if he had had only the bagel, he would still be hungry.
Mm.
The reason the bagel worked is because he had the 3 rolls beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a lesson in life. Something happens and you're finally successful, and you think, oh, I should have done this right away and I would have been able to skip everything that came before. No, you couldn't.
Right. Mm-hmm.
All success is built on the previous failures.
Mm-hmm.
Without those failures, the success wouldn't be what it is.
Mm-hmm.
If you can even call it failure.
Mm-hmm.
So every experience is necessary, which is why it happened, and it contributes to the eventual success and the eventual contentment or happiness or whatever. So you never regret what was. You can regret your choices because those were up to you. But what actually happened is never up to you, so that you can't regret. Those were all meant to happen.
Mm-hmm.
At any rate, what is it with the plagues? Why wouldn't the 10th plague have been successful without the first 9? So we know, according to Kabbalah, that the world is created in 10 steps. The 10 divine attributes with which the world is created. That's why the number 10 is like a complete number. It describes all of creation, because all of creation came in 10 steps. Now, in these 10 steps, you can either be holy or unholy. For example, one of the steps is kindness, generosity. Is kindness a good thing? Generally, yes. Can it be negative and unholy? Absolutely. You can have unholy kindness, like unholy love.
Mm-hmm.
So, if a person is suffering from unholy love, one of the levels of his existence, one of the rungs on his ladder, is broken. let's say he has a sense of law and order. He's a very disciplined person. Everything has to be right. Everything has to be in its proper place. Everything has to be in proper proportion. Good thing. Can also be very evil. You can become very demanding of others rather than yourself, expecting perfection of others rather than yourself. And then you become very critical and condemning and intolerant. Not so good. So let's say a person is suffering from unholy kindness and unholy discipline. Okay, now 2% of his world is damaged. What happens when everything in a person's life is wrong? It's all unholy. His kindness, his compassion, his judgment, his loyalty, they're all bad. So to repair that will take 10 steps, because 10 things need to be repaired. And you can't repair it all with one big change, because then the repair is superficial. It's like glossing over. If you want to really make a change, you have to make a change in the person's love and kindness. You have to make a change in the person's compassion, because that can be unholy. You have to make a change in the person's devotion, because he can be devoted to evil. So every one of the 10 steps demands individual attention. That's what was happening in Egypt. It wasn't merely punishment or intimidation to get Pharaoh to let the Jews go. Letting the Jews go would have been the godly thing to do. Well, they were not godly. And the godly thing to do did not appeal to them. They had other ideas. It took 10 plagues to correct all 10 levels until Pharaoh admitted, God is righteous and I am wrong. That was the purpose of the plagues. It wasn't just to get the Jews out. Because to get the Jews out of Egypt, you don't have to torture them. Just make them fall asleep for a couple of hours, Jews go and leave, and that's it. Nobody needs to suffer or get hurt. Each plague, by the way, each plague happened in a separate month. There weren't 2 plagues in the same month. It seems like they happened one after the other. Before they recuperated from one, the next one was upon them. No, each plague lasted a few days, but then there was no other plague that month until the next month. So, literally, Egypt was tortured for 10 months. There's got to be justification for that. God is not cruel, so why would he drag it out like that? So the answer is, each attribute, each quality, each trait needed to be fixed, and they were fixed one at a time until even Pharaoh, who considered himself God, came to recognize the true God and that God is right and that he was wrong, and now you have a whole different country. There was a real significant change in the mentality and the character of ancient Egypt. So when we tell the story to children, we shouldn't emphasize Like kids love, uh, the movie Home Alone. Kids love to see the bad guy suffer. Every kind of torture, every kind of pain, every kind of frustration. And they just get really excited about it and get a lot of pleasure from seeing the bad guys suffer. And that's not a good thing. You don't want to encourage that in children. So that even though Pharaoh deserved every plague he got, relishing somebody else's pain, not a good thing. So the emphasis should not be on, whoa, did the Egyptians get it? One after the other, they were tortured, they were dinner, they were frightened, don't do that. Every one of the plagues was absolutely necessary, and it wasn't just to make the Egyptians miserable. And it wasn't just revenge. The proof of it is, God himself said to Moshe, I will send this plague against the Egyptians, but Pharaoh will not let you go because I will harden his heart. Now that's really nasty. How do you justify that? God hardens his heart and then punishes him for not letting the Jews go. That's really not nice. Not right. The hardening of the heart was not to cause him to refuse God's demand. The hardening of the heart was he is not going to be intimidated by the plague. So the plague will come and it will not convince him. And therefore, he will still be deciding freely whether he wants to let the Jews go or not. And he will not because he's still evil. In other words, as evil as he was, if he was intimidated by the plague, he would let the Jews go. But against his will. That was not the objective. The objective was that the Egyptians should want the Jews to leave, should agree that they should leave, and should actually encourage them to leave. In other words, God wanted a change of heart. But if you just give in because the plague is too hard to tolerate, then you haven't changed. You're just a coward. So the first few plagues, Pharaoh was tough enough to resist the plague and not be impressed. But after the fifth, it would naturally intimidate him. So God said, no, I'm not going to let it intimidate him. He is not going to let the Jews go until he realizes that it's the right thing to do. Not because of the plagues. Well, then what was the point of the plagues? If the plague was not there to make the Egyptians release the Jews, then what was it there for? If you know it's not going to work, why do you keep doing it? So we must assume that the plagues had a different purpose. The purpose was not to break Pharaoh. The purpose was to refine. So the first plague refined their understanding and their thinking. The second plague refined their kindness and their generosity. And the third plague refined their discipline and their perfection. So each plague took a little darkness out of Egypt. And by the 10th plague, they were free of all their corruption, and they could think clearly and realized God is right, the Jews need to go, the Torah needs to be given, the world needs to be elevated and redeemed. They got it. In the end, it turns out, Pharaoh not only let the Jews go, but he urged them to go. He drove them out of Egypt. And here's part of what changed in Pharaoh's thinking. Because he was not a fool. He was actually quite smart. Impressively smart. When Moshe first comes to Pharaoh and says, we need to go into the desert to serve God, Pharaoh heard, we need to go into the desert to find God, to search for God, to reach out to God. In response to that, Pharaoh said, I can't let you do that. It's irresponsible. It's wasteful. What are you going to do? Wander around in a desert looking for something you can't see? Not a good idea. So he said no. A couple of plagues happen. Moshe comes back and says, now will you let them go? He said, all right, I'll let you go. Take 10 guys and go. And Moshe said, no. All of us, men, women, and children. Pharaoh said, oh, that's crazier than I thought. No, you can't go. In fact, if I let you go, I would be guilty of bloodshed because you're going to go out into the desert looking for God. You're not going to find anything, and you're going to feel so disillusioned and desperate that you're all going to commit suicide. You know, this happens all the time. People go out into the desert looking for God, and they drink the Kool-Aid. In fact, he did. The astrologers told them that the Jews go out into the desert, there's going to be blood. They see a lot of blood. It turned out it was the blood of circumcision. Because in Egypt, the Jews were not circumcised. As soon as they left Egypt, everybody had their circumcision. So, but that, the astrologers see signs, and then they have to interpret it. So they misinterpreted. They thought it meant dying or being killed. At any rate, Pharaoh was saying it is totally irresponsible to go off looking for God. It never works. It always ends up being bloody. So he said, no, can't go. What happened at the end was Pharaoh suddenly heard correctly what Moshe was saying. We're not looking for God. God is looking for us. We're not going into the desert to find God. We're going into the desert because God made an appointment with us. He's going to meet us at Mount Sinai, and he's going to instruct us on how to live our lives. Finally, Pharaoh heard that. It was so foreign to the thinking of the time. They had many gods. They worshipped almost everything that moved. But the idea that the God is reaching out to you, never heard such a thing. And so when Moshe comes and says we have to go into the desert to serve God, he assumed it meant to find God or to create a God. After the 10 plagues, Pharaoh suddenly realized, actually after the 9th plague, he realized, no, God is calling for the Jews. The Jews are not going to search for God. Well, in that case, how can you say no to God? So you have to go before we all die. And so he chased them out faster than they even wanted to go. If it's God looking for you, then get going. If it's you looking for God, don't be crazy. So that's the transformation that happened to the Egyptians. They went from believing that a God is indifferent, has no interest in you, and you have to find him and you have to appease him and you have to sacrifice your firstborn to him, and then maybe he'll be nice to you. By the end of the plagues, the Egyptians had a completely different perspective.
If you enjoyed this conversation or this topic and you're looking for more information, or you want to hear it again from another angle, there's a way to do that. And that is in this book. It's all there. Order it from Amazon. You can read it, reread it, and share it.
We have a Sunday night program for VIPs that you might be interested in. It's informal, it's questions and answers, it's conversation. It's really relaxed, it's really pleasant, enjoyable, informative, and kind of community-like. It's a Sunday night program. There's a Wednesday morning program for the VIPs, and there's a Wednesday night program. All of it just conversation, casual, laid back, unscripted. So join us, take a look, click the link below and see which of the three suits you best, and join us for some enjoyable conversation.